In the vast expanse of southeast Colorado's desolate and unforgiving plains sits a deteriorating relic of this country's checkered past. An American concentration camp that you've likely never heard of. One of 10, located right here in the Western Plains. My name is Jared Rock, and I'm a documentary filmmaker from Denver, Colorado, and I'm married to a descendant of the Okubos, a family imprisoned among the dust and sagebrush at Camp Amache in Colorado and Camp Minidoka in Idaho back in 1942. I'm going to tell you a true story, one brimming with resilience, compassion, and bravery, juxtaposed with immense loss, pain, and uncertainty. A story of American citizens imprisoned in their own country, based purely on their ethnicity. A story that I likely would not have known about had I not married into a Japanese-American family who once lived among these decaying cement slabs. In order to help me tell their story, I've included archival footage and interviewed members of the Okubo family. I want you to hear their stories from the perspective of those who were there and their immediate descendants. These stories must be heard. This history must be taught. It was the Spanish philosopher George Santayana who so eloquently put it. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Let me tell you a story in the form of a dream. I don't know why I have to tell it, but I know what it means. Close your eyes, just picture the scene as I paint it for you. It was World War II when this man named Kenji woke up. Ken was not a soldier. He was just a man with a family who owned a store in LA. That day, he crawled out of bed like he always did. Bacon and eggs with wife and kids. He lived on the second floor of a little store he ran. He moved to LA from Japan. They called him immigrant. In Japanese, he'd say he was called Issei. That meant first generation in the United States when everybody was afraid of the Germans, afraid of the Japs, but most of all afraid of a homeland attack. And that morning, when Ken went out on the doormat, his world went black, cause right there, front page news, 3 weeks before 1942, Pearl Harbor's been bombed and the Japs are coming. Pictures of soldiers dying and running. Ken knew what it would lead to, just like he guessed. The president said the evil Japanese in our home country would be locked away. They gave Ken a couple of days to get his whole life packed in 2 bags. Just 2 bags, couldn't even pack his clothes. Some folks didn't even have a suitcase to pack anything in, so 2 trash bags is all they gave them. And when the kids asked Mom, where are we going? Nobody even knew what to say to them. Ken didn't want to lie, he said the US is looking for spies. So we have to live in a place called Manzanar, where a lot of Japanese people are. Stop it, don't look at the gunmen. You don't want to get the soldiers wondering if you're gonna run or not, cause if you run then you might get shot. Other than that, try not to think about it. Try not to worry about it being so crowded. But someday we'll get out. Someday.
When I started researching and filming for this documentary, a lingering question I kept coming back to was how. How is it possible that in the 20th century United States, the government could imprison so many of its citizens based only on the color of their skin? How could everybody be okay with it? And even more befuddling, how have I heard so little about it? The truth is a shocking reality, accompanied by a spectacular failure of our educators and legislators. A failure history's revisionists have taken advantage of by attempting to erase a repulsive stain on this nation's past. In the months following the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, already prevalent anti-Asian rhetoric and legislation in the United States, combined with pressure from nationalist groups, to culminate in the signing of Executive Order 9066 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in February of 1942. In the order, FDR claimed the executive authority to construct military areas, giving military commanders discretion to incarcerate anyone they considered appropriate. The language in 9066 did not single out an ethnic group, but laid the groundwork for Public Proclamation No. 4. Issued by Lieutenant General John L. DeWitt of the Western Defense Command, the proclamation forced the detention of any persons of Japanese descent living on the West Coast under the guise of an evacuation, giving residents only 48 hours' notice to get their affairs in order. Within 6 months of DeWitt's proclamation, approximately 122,000 people, 70,000 of them naturalized U.S. citizens, were forced from their homes, processed in assembly centers, and distributed via train among remote camps across the American West and Arkansas. The U.S. government called them relocation centers, or internment camps. These titles sugarcoated what was really happening. American citizens were being forced into concentration camps based on their ancestry.
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our west coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous, but no one knew what would happen among this concentrated population if Japanese forces should try to invade our shores. Military authorities therefore determined that all of them, citizens and aliens alike, would have to move. This picture tells how the mass migration was accomplished. Neither the Army nor the War Relocation Authority relished the idea of taking men, women, and children from their homes, their shops, and their farms. So the military and civilian agencies alike determined to do the job as a democracy should, with real consideration for the people involved. First attention was given to the problems of sabotage and espionage. Now,
This film was created and distributed by the U.S. government to justify the actions taken against Japanese Americans in the wake of December 7th, 1941. Propaganda films like these, lined with rhetoric, effectively took advantage of a nation gripped by fear. However, the fear of people of Asian descent in America was not newly established by the bombing of Pearl Harbor, but rather exacerbated by it. To understand why, we must go further back into history. During the gold rush of the 1800s, Chinese immigration to the United States peaked. As many immigrants enjoyed the rising profits and success promised by the land of the free, tensions between Chinese and non-Chinese persons rose in tandem. These tensions eventually gave way to the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which suspended the immigration of Chinese persons for a period of 10 years. States like California and Oregon had also passed exclusion laws prohibiting land purchase by people who were not of white or African descent. A few decades later, among a wave of public anti-Japanese hysteria following an influx of immigrants from Japan, new fears arose from the Anglo public, giving way to kindred land ownership laws. One such law was the California Alien Land Law Act of 1913, which prohibited aliens from owning or leasing land long-term. Another was the Asian Exclusion Act, often referred to incorrectly as the Immigration Act of 1924. Noticing a trend here? These exclusions sought to limit immigration and land ownership, yet proved ineffective as immigrants lawfully employed loopholes granting property ownership to their children who were born on U.S. soil and were therefore U.S. citizens. Nevertheless, the exclusions stoked and rationalized existing racial tensions, while appeasing white citizens who feared losing land and opportunities to Asian immigrants. Fast forward to Japan's entry into World War II, and those fears reached pinnacle. Within 3 months of the attack on Pearl Harbor, every person of Japanese descent living on the West Coast was deemed a potential spy and ordered by the War Relocation Authority to report to an assembly center for relocation. They were told to bring only what they could carry, leaving behind everything they had worked to achieve.
Yeah, they were store owners, grocery store owners in Eagle Rock, California. They had a house. I mean, they were living very comfortably, at that time. And so when the order came down, they had to sell everything. They had a few weeks, and of course, sold things pennies on the dollar. And all they could take was each a small suitcase. So they had to choose what they brought, and I'm not sure what they chose to bring.
What were your parents doing in Los Angeles? What type of?
They had a grocery store in downtown Los Angeles, and they
in effect, lost everything that they had there. We were totally evacuated.
They have to sell on short notice? Or?
Very short notice. Sell is almost gave it away.
Hmm.
What he sold, my dad sold the business was less than what we had just paid for a butcher showcase that we had put in the store not long before then.
What did your mom do for work before she went to
She
the camp?
she was a waitress. She always worked in a restaurant. Yeah, and my dad was you know, the movies, the operator that shows the movies in the theaters. That's what he was doing, and then part time he would work at the docks.
And then their valuables that they had, along with the other members of the Japanese American community, they stored them at the Buddhist temple in Los Angeles, downtown LA, which is now the Japanese American National Museum, part of that museum property. But during the war, that was broken into and all the valuables were stolen. And so they literally had nothing, to go back to. And so pretty much their store, their house, and all their valuables were gone.
Yeah, a lot of people were really angry. I remember they thought the churches would be a sacred place, and so that's where a lot of us, packed our trunks and all and left it in there. And then we go there, and you could see that they were broken into, things scattered, things. Of course, we were just kids, but like his treasures, family heirlooms, they were all gone. Yeah, it was sad when they came. They thought everything will be there.
In early May of 1942, the exclusion order, executive order, which required us to leave the West Coast, was put into force, and we were moved into the Santa Anita Assembly Center, located at the Santa Anita Racetrack in Arcadia, California. We were one of the fortunate ones because our barracks were in the parking lot and not in the stables, like many of the early residents were housed.
I forget the words, but temporary places until some of the barracks weren't completed. So some of us stayed in churches
Okay.
until they were all,
Okay.
because a lot of it was mainly the bathrooms and showers and things.
Okay.
It wasn't completed, so we
Okay.
had to go to outhouses.
Oh.
They built outhouses. Yeah. But, yeah.
Prisoners were housed at the racetrack until permanent camps were constructed in remote locations far from major population centers. 10 camps total were erected, including the Poston and Gila River camps in Arizona, Manzanar and Tool Lake camps in California, Jerome and Rower in Arkansas, Hart Mountain in Wyoming, Minidoka in Idaho, and Camp Amache in Colorado. When the camps were ready, and often beforehand, the prisoners were loaded onto train cars and shipped across the country, destination unknown.
We were in Santa Anita until September of 1942, at which time we were moved by train to Amache, located in southeastern Colorado.
It was, I think it was probably 2 or 3 days to get out there. And of course, just the discomfort. Because, when they were going out there, it was during the summer. And it wasn't like they had air conditioning back then, And so, traveling out there was uncomfortable, and it was scary. They didn't know where they were going.
In August 1942, the first prisoners arrived at Camp Amache. By October, the camp was full, holding 7,597 prisoners from Central and Southern California, over 2/3 of whom were confirmed U.S. citizens. Practically overnight, Amache had become the 10th most populous city in Colorado. The camp had 348 barrack buildings, housing up to 6 family units each, a barbed wire perimeter fence, and 8 guard towers watching over the prisoners. Each barrack had a coal-burning heater and cots for prisoners to sleep on. There was no running water and 1 communal bathroom per 12 barracks.
I do know that when they, got off the train there in Grenada, it was here they leave Los Angeles and then they get off the train in Grenada. So just the geography was very different.
For the nearly 2,000 school-age prisoners, education centers opened within the camp in October of 1942. Conditions were described by school administrators as poor, as classes were being held in unmodified army barracks. However, the poor conditions did not seem to have any effect at all on the education the children received.
Yeah, I think one of his teachers was a life changer for him.
Tell me about that.
She was one that told him, not to give up and that he could still accomplish, his dreams and everything, and was just really positive, in a very negative situation.
Oh yeah, they had schools.
What do you remember about that?
Most of the teachers were Japanese Americans that previously were teachers, but there was a few Caucasian.
Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, when we finally got out of camp, we went to Cole Junior High School, and one of the teachers were amazed that we were actually ahead of their class in the studies, and they said, "Weren't you in camp?" And we said, "Yes." Says, "What kind of teachers did you have?" And we said, "Well, a lot of them were college people."
Makes sense.
And they said they did an excellent job educating you. We were ahead of them, class-wise.
Although the camp was very much a prison, and the justification for their detention was irrational at best, the prisoners maintained an incredible mental fortitude. Despite their country turning its back on them, some Japanese Americans felt they were doing their civic duty for the good of the public. Not everyone agreed. Despite being surrounded by miles of barbed wire and desert, the unwavering spirit and determination of the Japanese American prisoners shone brightly. They did their best to turn the plot of dusty earth they were confined to into a home. Gardens were planted, and serene ponds were dug and decorated. Amache High School, which was a source of friction with the town of Grenada because it was the most expensive building in the area, held seasonal dances for students. There was a sports field where baseball and football teams played, and a rec hall with games. A prisoner connected to a coastal fish company had fresh fish imported daily. Artists, dentists, doctors, teachers, scientists, and businessmen continued their professions while guns were pointed at them from above. The WRA and the Army soon realized, however, that armed guards were unnecessary and left inmate oversight to the civilian authority. The camp had its own police force, firehouse, newspaper, post office, and city government, all operating under civilian administrators employed by the WRA. As more time passed and no Japanese spies were found among the camps, inmates began to secure more freedoms. The camp also sent its children to fight for the same country that imprisoned them in World War II, as part of the U.S. Army All-Japanese 442 Regiment, a unit my wife's great-uncle Shig fought with. Undeterred by the hate they received at home and eager to prove their worth abroad to a nation that had forsaken them, the 442 quickly became the most decorated U.S. combat team in United States military history.
After war was declared, I was evacuated from the Pacific coast. When the call came for volunteers for a combat team, I volunteered from a relocation center to show my loyalty and to prove that I had the right to live as a good American citizen.
Their stories of heroism in serving their country began to steer the narrative against the Japanese Americans into a more positive direction. In all, 953 men and women from Amache volunteered for the regiment, nearly 10% of the camp's entire population, by far the largest number of any camp, with 31 selflessly giving their lives as their families sat behind barbed wire. Indeed, it wasn't until October of 1945, 2 months after the war ended due to the U.S. nuclear bombings of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that the prisoners were released from the concentration camps. When they were released, some renounced their citizenships immediately and went back to Japan. If they weren't going to be seen as American, then they would try to be Japanese. Others moved back to California. The governor of Colorado at the time, Ralph Carr, welcomed former inmates to stay in the state and moved to Denver, an opportunity the Okubo family took advantage of. Hank received a scholarship at 16 years old out of Amache High School to attend Colorado A&M, now Colorado State University. After 1 year, he volunteered for the Army and was stationed with occupation troops in Japan. He met his wife Aiko at a church dance some years later, where they would eventually have 4 children and establish their lives in Centennial, Colorado. The story does not end here, however. Following the closure of the camps, the U.S. government took down and sold every building that they could. Some turned into horse stables and barns, others into homes and city council buildings, leaving only concrete slabs, shattered lumber, and painful memories behind. It seemed all parties were content with forgetting and moving on from an unpleasant history. In 1978, concerned and understandably disgruntled members of the Japanese American Citizens League pursued the government's acknowledgments of its wrongs and monetary reparations for lost wealth. In 1988, the Civil Liberties Act gave surviving Japanese Americans reparations in the amount of $20,000 per family, and absolved the U.S. government of any future liability or lawsuits. Although formal calculations are thought to be impossible, this number is a fraction of the wealth inferred to have been lost by Japanese Americans.
Yeah, I think the apology meant more than any check. Yeah, it was healing. That was the impact. That it was a full admission that what happened, and what happened was wrong. And the U.S. government was saying we were wrong.
Do you feel like they did enough for you guys?
You mean our friends?
No, the government. As far as the apology and the reparation.
No, because the attitude was we were Japanese. They didn't trust us as to who we really should trust.
Despite the government's admissions of guilt, people still believe that either the camps were necessary to protect Americans or denounce their existence altogether. One such person was a teacher of Derek's brother.
I think the clearest memory I have was when Craig came back from school and said that, he was called a liar, at school when he had brought up the camps. So obviously there had been some discussion about it beforehand because he knew and brought it, but I can't remember that specific, but I do remember that instance when that happened, and just how angry my parents were, that had happened, and she called up the school the next day, but they had talked about it, and that was when my dad had said, well, I guess we're going to have to talk about it.
The denial of the camp's existence in the face of an elementary school student whose parents were imprisoned there motivated Hank and Aiko. They were determined to tell their story. They were invited to schools and organizations across Colorado to speak about their experience in an American concentration camp. Hank was even part of a group that submitted the first inquiry to have Amache added to the National Registry of Historic Places, a request granted in 1994. Further progress came with immense and critical help. Progress likely not possible had a man named John Hopper not listened to a job offer during a round of golf. Hello.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
All right, let's let her rip.
Oh yeah, when he came to Grenada from Los Alamos, and he saw he was a history teacher, and so he saw that the camp was right there, and he said, "Gosh, this is a history lesson."
I had some really bright students, like I still do today, and I just decided that we had a primary source, and I think that we didn't have any information on Amache whatsoever.
And but when John came and he went to Ian DeBono, who was superintendent at the time, said, "Can we do this?" And Ian said, "Yeah, absolutely." And so that was when John assigned the students to go and research it and talk to survivors. And and then that awakened something within the students.
Awaken it did. Together, Hopper and his students founded the Amache Preservation Society, a group dedicated to preserving the site of the camp. Since the society's founding, the students and other members have volunteered their time and fully restored a guard tower, a barrack building, and a block rec hall. They've also established, staff, and curate a museum packed with historical artifacts from the camp, sent to them by former inmates and their families from all around the world. One of the most meaningful things they've done, however, is to properly landscape and maintain the camp cemetery. What was once an unmarked plot of land in a field of Granada is now a proper resting place for those who lost their lives in the camp. When Hank Okubo passed away in 2002, there was concern among former prisoner activists about the future and direction of the movement Hank had been such a vital part of.
When Dad died in 2002, it was at his funeral. I remember down in the at the after service reception, and I got cornered by about three of his colleagues, Nob Furuye, Jim Hata, and Kent Yoritomo. And I remember Nob saying, he was worried that things were going to die. They weren't going to be able to keep things going without Dad leading, the charge. And I remember telling him, maybe it was a little voice, and I was hearing in the back of my head going, step up, And so I said, okay, no, it's not going to die. And if I have to, do whatever I have to help keep it going, I'm committed to doing so.
Derek has continued his father's legacy admirably, even testifying in front of Congress in 2007 to have Amache named a National Historic Landmark, a feat accomplished in 2008. Derek was also a vital resource for the group campaigning to have Amache designated a national park, an effort rewarded by President Biden's signing of the Amache National Historic Site Act in early 2022. Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland is quoted as saying, "As a nation, we must face the wrongs of our past in order to build a more just and equitable future." Haaland is right. We must face the wrongs of our past, and to do that, we must acknowledge their existence. This includes using specific, historically accurate terminology, and not minimizing the experience. The scars run deep within former prisoners and their families. Cultural repression is long withstanding and prevalent among the descendants of those once imprisoned in the camps. Customs, language, and tradition have been lost through generations in order to appear more American. I've watched my wife embark on a journey of cultural discovery due to this repression, and she is not alone. If we were to mandate the teaching of the history of Japanese American incarceration post-World War II, others might be able to undergo a similar journey to discover their roots. Having been raised and lived in Colorado for the last 25 years, somehow Concentration Camp Amache in southeast Colorado has evaded an education curriculum from Cherry Creek School District, one of the top districts in the United States. I'm not alone in this lapse, and it needs to change. We are not educated on one of Colorado's most important histories because we'd rather not talk about it. The remnants of an American concentration camp sit within these state lines, yet many don't even know it. This is unacceptable. We cannot continue to let Colorado history be swept under the rug. Between 2019 and 2020, Governor Jared Polis signed 2 public school education mandates, one of which mandates academics concerning the Holocaust and genocide in state-funded institutions, and another which outlines the inclusion of American minorities' social contributions into curriculums. The framework has been laid. We can teach about this. We should be teaching about this. So, do you feel that there's a problem with the way that the history is taught?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Why is this not taught?
It's an
And
issue.
I'm going, you tell me. I mean, I guess because we're doomed to repeat it.
It is not a question of whether or not it will happen again. It's already happening. Immigrant families fleeing violent third world countries are currently locked up in concentration camps at our southern borders. Children have been separated from their families. A former president of the United States publicly called them thugs, rapists, and drug addicts in a warning to his supporters. Fear is a powerful motivator, and people fear what they do not know. Our best tool against that is education and making the unknown known. Today, I call on all educators, lawmakers, citizens, and students of Colorado to demand an accurate portrayal of Colorado's history in our lessons, the good, the bad, and the ugly, for ourselves and for our children. We are a consistently progressive state, often at the forefront of new ideas, and it is high time we continue that legacy. To legislators, I propose a state curriculum mandate of the events leading to and following Japanese American imprisonment during World War II for any school receiving state government funding. The person who can show you the way is John Hopper. To educators, be like Hopper. Be proactive about teaching the subject to your students. Make sure they know what happened there in the dusty desert of Colorado back in 1942. The information is public and available, the content invaluable. To citizens and students, the only thing standing between ourselves and meaningful change is our capacity to do just that, change. Collectively, we must demand action. We must deny those who would repudiate our history the opportunity to do so. We must let the voices from Amache speak, lest we find our children behind the barbed wire.
And I guess that's the main thing. That you just can't judge a people by their appearance.
Do you think the lesson was learned?
I doubt it. No, I haven't found any evidence that it's been learned.
So now they're in a town with soldiers surrounding them. Every day, every night, look down at them. From watchtowers up on the wall, Ken couldn't really hate them at all. They were just doing the job, and he wasn't gonna make any problems. He had a little garden, vegetables and fruits that he gave to the troops in a basket his wife made. But in the back of his mind, he wanted his family's life saved. Prisoners of war in their own damn country, what for? And time passed in the prison town. He wondered if he'd live it down if and when they were free. The only way out was joining the army. And supposedly, some men went out for the army, signed on, and ended up flying to Japan with a bomb. That 15-kiloton blast put an end to the war pretty fast. 2 cities were blown to bits. The end of the war came quick, and Ken got out. Big hopes of a normal life with his kids and his wife. But then they got back to their home, and what they saw made him feel so alone. These people had trashed every room, smashed in the windows and bashed in the doors, written on the walls and the floor, "Jap's not welcome anymore." And Kenji dropped both of his bags at his sides and just stood outside. He looked at his wife without words to say. She looked back at him, wiping tears away, and said, "Someday we'll be okay, someday." Now the names have been changed, but the story's true. My family was locked up back in 42. My family was there where it was dark and damp, and they called it an internment camp.
When we first got back from camp, it was pretty bad.
I remember my husband said, "Oh, we're going to stay till last." Then my husband died before they closed the camp.